Chapter 6 People, the Modular Man. Each spring, an immense lemming-like migration begins all over the eastern United States. Singly and in groups, burdened with sleeping bags, blankets and bathing suits, some 15,000 American college students toss aside their texts and follow a highly accurate homing instinct that leads them to the sun-bleached shoreline of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. There, for approximately a week, this teeming, milling mass of sun and sex worshippers swims, sleeps, flirts, drinks beer, sprawls and brawls in the sands. At the end of this period, they pack their kits and join in a mass exodus, and in a few hours nothing is left of the great beach and booze party except the litter that they leave and about $1.5 million in the cash registers of local merchants, who regard this annual invasion as a tainted blessing that threatens public sanity while it underwrites private profit. What attracts the young people is more than an irresponsible passion for sunshine or sex. Rather, it is a sense of freedom without responsibility. In the words of a 19-year-old New York co-ed who made her way to the festivities recently, "You're not worried about what you do or say here because, frankly, you'll never see these people again." What the Fort Lauderdale rite supplies is a transient agglomeration of people that makes possible a great diversity of temporary interpersonal relationships, and is precisely this temporariness that increasingly characterises human relationships as we move further towards super-industrialism. For just as things and places flow through our lives, so too do people. The cost of involvement. Urbanism, the city dweller's way of life, has preoccupied sociology since the turn of the century. Max Weber pointed out the obvious fact that people in cities cannot know all their neighbours as intimately as it was possible for them to do so in small communities. George Simmel carried this idea one step further when he declared, rather quaintly, that if the urban individual reacted emotionally to each and every person with whom he came into contact, or cluttered his mind with information about them, he would be completely atomised internally and would fall into an unthinkable mental condition. Louis Wirth, in turn, noted the fragmented nature of urban relationships. Characteristically, urbanites meet one another in highly segmental roles, he wrote. Their dependence upon others is confined to a highly fractionalised aspect of the other's round of activity. Rather than becoming deeply involved with the total personality of every individual we meet, he explained, we necessarily maintain superficial and partial contact with some. We are interested only in the efficiency of the shoe salesman in meeting our needs. We couldn't care less that his wife is an alcoholic. What this means is that we form limited involvement relationships with most of the people around us. Consciously or not, we define our relationships with most people in functional terms. So long as we do not become involved with the shoe salesman's problems at home, or his more general hopes, dreams and frustrations, he is for us fully interchangeable with any other salesperson of equal competence. In effect, we have applied the modular principle to human relationships. We have created the disposable person. Rather than entangling ourselves with the whole man, we plug into a module of his personality. Each personality can be imagined as a unique configuration of thousands of such modules. Thus no whole person is interchangeable with any other, but certain modules are. Since we are seeking only to buy a pair of shoes and not the friendship, love or hate of the salesperson, it is not necessary for us to tap into or engage with all of the other modules that form their personality. Our relationship is safely limited. There is limited liability on both sides. The relationship entails certain accepted forms of behaviour and communication. Both sides understand, consciously or otherwise, the limitations and laws. Difficulties arise only when one or another party oversteps the tacitly understood limits, when he attempts to connect up with some module not relevant to the function at hand. Today, a vast sociological and psychological literature is devoted to the alienation presumed to flow from this fragmentation of relationships. Much of the rhetoric of existentialism and the student revolt decries this fragmentation. It is said that we are not sufficiently involved with our fellow men. Millions of young people go about seeking total involvement. Before leaping to the popular conclusion that modularisation is bad, however, it might be well to look more closely at the matter. Theologian Harvey Cox, echoing Simmel, has pointed out that in an urban environment, the attempt to involve oneself fully with everyone can lead only to self-destruction and emotional emptiness. Urban Man, he writes, must have more or less impersonal relationships with most of the people with whom he comes into contact with, precisely in order to choose certain friendships to nourish and cultivate. His life represents a point touched by dozens of systems and hundreds of people. His capacity to know some of them better necessitates his minimising the depth of his relationship to many others. Listening to the postman gossip becomes for the urban man an act of sheer graciousness, since he probably has no interest in the people the postman wants to talk about. Moreover, before lamenting modularisation, it is necessary to ask ourselves whether we really would prefer to return to the traditional condition of man in which each individual presumably related to the whole personality of a few people, rather than to the personality modules of many. Traditional man has been so sentimentalised, so cloyingly romanticised, that we frequently overlook the consequence of such a return. The very same writers who lament fragmentation also demand freedom, yet overlook the unfreedom of people bound together in totalistic relationships. For any relationship implies mutual demands and expectations. The more intimately involved a relationship, the greater the pressure the parties exert on one another to fulfil these expectations. The tighter and more totalistic the relationship, the more modules, so to speak, are brought into play, and the more numerous are the demands we make. In a modular relationship, the demands are strictly bounded. So long as the shoe salesman performs his rather limited service for us, thereby fulfilling our rather limited expectations, we do not insist that he believes in our God, or that he be tidy at home, or share our political values, or enjoy the same kind of food or music that we do. We leave him free to all other matters, as he leaves us free to be atheist, heterosexual, or homosexual, or whatever our political allegiances may be. This is not true of the total relationship, and cannot be. To a certain point, fragmentation and freedom go together. All of us seem to need some totalistic relationships in our lives, but to decry the fact that we cannot have only such relationships is nonsense, and to prefer a society in which the individual has holistic relationships with a few, rather than modular relationships with many, is to wish for a return to the imprisonment of the past. A past when individuals may have been more tightly bound to one another, but when they were also more tightly regimented by social conventions, sexual mores, political and religious restrictions. This is not to say that modular relationships entail no risks, or that this is the best of all possible worlds. There are in fact profound risks in the situation, as we shall attempt to show. Until now, however, the entire public and professional discussion of these issues has been badly out of focus, for it has overlooked a critical dimension of all interpersonal relationships, their duration.